Okay, I guess we'll get started. And thank you all for coming out with full force. I know we have a pretty exciting speaker here who's been here before and is quite beloved by many of us here too. So welcome back to the chapel.
That's the first time you called a speaker beloved.
Well, I'll mention something.
I put him up to that.
Here, it's the first time he's called the speaker beloved.
I know we inaugurated the Spring Colloquium series a couple of weeks ago, and 3 weeks ago in fact, and then due to various factors we couldn't have a regular schedule starting with 3 weeks ago. But from now on, pretty much every week we have someone scheduled, so hopefully it should be a good, very interesting, vibrant series from now on. And we do have our visitor today from Penn State. I'm very pleased and honored to present Dr. Mary Beth Oliver today. Several of you have both professional and personal relationships with Mary Beth. Many of you have worked on projects with her. She was recently editor of Media Psychology, so I know many of you have worked with her through that process. And many old relationships, people like Jane, and we even have Mary Beth's aunt in here. There we have Mary Beth refers to Dr. Gibson as Aunt Rhonda. Yeah, the genealogy behind that will be apparent later on when Rhonda can mention that. You are her aunt, right? Yeah. I'm not going to get into too many details regarding Mary Beth's work. Most of you are very familiar with that. One of the premier names in media effects and media psychology, looks at social cognition and media, looked at a lot in terms of race and gender, and a lot of her recent work is focused on entertainment and emotions. And she's doing some pretty interesting work, just going beyond the whole notion of hedonism and entertainment, and looking at it in terms of how mixed emotions can have such a huge impact. And that's what she's going to be talking to us today. She's been working on this program of research now for the last 4 or 5 years, and she's got some pretty interesting empirical data to share too. And most of you know that she's also replaced Dolph Zillman in the Bryant and Zillman Bible, so it's now Bryant and Oliver, the latest edition which has just come out, which has chapters by Jane Brown, Francesca, some of the other people here. And she's also co-editor with Robin Abbey of the forthcoming The Sage Handbook of Media Processes and Effects. So like I said, it's an honor and privilege to have her here, so welcome to Chapel Hill. Over to you.
Thank you. I feel so welcome here, and this, given that this is, if you noticed, if you watch me setting up, I have a folder called Presentations and Talks, and there's UNC, 2004, UNC 2006, UNC. So it is just such a pleasure and an honor for me to be here. And last night I had the distinct honor of seeing my first UNC basketball game, which was a total thrill, I have to say. I mean, it was sleeting in Pennsylvania, and if I would have known, I would have crawled from Pennsylvania all the way down here to get to see that basketball game. It was so exciting. So anyway, it's great to be back. The last time I was here, actually, I was kind of working through some ideas on a very similar topic, and it's kind of evolved into this point, but it's still evolving, these thoughts about entertainment and emotion, and as a result, I will benefit tremendously from your input here, and you're saying that idea doesn't resonate with me, or that idea makes me think this, or that idea is just full of beans even, and so that'll be helpful. So I really want you to feel free to please tell me your thoughts here. And where I'm leading, I've been working on a puzzle, a paradox, and it's leading me to really think about mixed affect. And I put various other names here. Art Rainey, who's at Florida State, Ann Barsh, and Louise Mars are different faculty members at various universities I've been collaborating with on these studies who are interested in similar things. And then the folks here on the right are some graduate students at Penn State who have been really helpful and fun, and we get together and collect data, play research. So I just wanted to acknowledge these fine folks. So some background, and this you heard me say, I think before, if you heard me the last time I was here, but the background, the puzzle, the thing I use as a jumping off point here is research in media effects, mainly, on enjoyment and entertainment, and this is really the work, of course, of Dolph Zillman. who wanted to suggest that entertainment and enjoyment, it really reflects hedonistic tendencies, that we're hedonists essentially, and that we are seekers of pleasures and avoiders of pain, and that we behave.
Work with
She's a plant. And there are of course, different theories that I think both adhere to this. And one is a disposition theory, which essentially argues that enjoyment is greatest when the good guys win, the bad guys lose, very broadly speaking. And that can be applied, for example, to sports too, and drama, and even news. They've applied this to news. So disposition theory does reflect, I think, this hedonistic assumption. And then mood management is another theory, and probably the one that I focused on the most recently, where hedonism is explicitly assumed. And the idea is that even though we may not be cognizant of this, we choose media, we select to view media in ways that serve to maintain positive moods and to diminish negative moods. And it's easy, I think, and it's fairly straightforward, I think, to think of lots of different examples of media that conform to that. That you might not have seen the top of it. If you haven't, you really ought to see it. It's called The World's Fastest Indian, about Burt Munro, the broke the world land speed record. It's great, very feel-good movie, and better like Beckham. And it was hard for me to get a graphic of a bad guy losing, but I think the Wicked Witch fits the bill. What a world, you know? She does. So there are lots of media entertainment that conform to those basic assumptions. At the same time, though, there are notable counterexamples. And so, you know, we've got lots of different films that are not unpopular. In fact, they're critically acclaimed. Many, I'm trying to put lots of different examples up there. Sophie's Choice and Leaving Las Vegas and Dead Man Walking, even, you know, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, that are acclaimed, and yet arguably they don't fit neatly into the good guy wins, bad guy loses formula at all, and yet we seem to, I'm hesitant to use the word enjoy. This is part of my dilemma here, thinking about this. To say we enjoy it, I don't know if it really fits so well, but we would certainly probably say that many of these that we appreciate. So, the paradox that has been haunting me for a while is why do viewers enjoy sad media? And I'm going to try to problematize that question here in a second, but that's been a paradox. Why do people enjoy sad media? And then, to make it even more of a paradox, there's some research and some of Rhonda's work, for example, would suggest this. The music, right? Why does sadness? Why is it that it seems like when we're in sad moods, we would want to see or we would enjoy sad media? So, you know, when I was in college and I would break up with a boyfriend, I would listen to Joni Mitchell. You know, just kind of wallow. I know. So, but that resonates. At least with, I can tell the women in here. I don't know what the guys listen to. They might listen to Joni Mitchell, probably. So these are the questions, and something about these questions to note are that I'm using these words sad media and sadness and enjoyment here, and this is where I want to kind of change the discussion a little bit. So today, and what I want to throw out to you to think about is maybe it's not that sad people like sad media at all, and instead of using those words, maybe other words would be better ones to use. And so I want to suggest that meaningful media might be the more apt term there, and sadness is just kind of there along for the ride. But it's really the meaningfulness that's driving, that's the thing at work. And sadness happens to just be there, but that's what we've measured. And so the limits of our measures are the limits of our world, you know. And so, and then instead of sadness, that we talk about meaningful affect. And the last time I was here, I was fooling around with an affect that at the time I was calling it tenderness, and I still kind of do call it that sometimes. But now I'm trying to make it consistent with this. I'm kind of also thinking maybe meaningful affect might be a word for it, and I'll get back to that too. And then I won't really get to this, but I do ultimately think that maybe we ought to stop being so obsessed with enjoyment of entertainment only. And I think that's a huge part, probably the biggest part, but also talk about appreciation of entertainment, because you know, it would be decidedly odd for me to go see a film like Schindler's List or Hotel Rwanda and walk out of the film and say, wow, I really enjoyed that, you know. But it would not be so odd to say, I really appreciated that, or I valued that experience, or something like that. So what I'm going to try to do here is mainly expand these to try to take a few baby steps toward these questions. And these questions are a little bit misplaced. But if we recast it in terms of meaningfulness, then that might be helpful. So far, so good? Yeah. Okay. So I want to, first of all, expand the notion of, instead of saying, look, we're talking about sad media. I mean, Joni Mitchell is a poet. And so it's not just that she's sad. Sad just kind of goes along to the ride, but it's really that she's insightful. And so that's what I want to kind of expand sad media and to talk about meaningful media couched in terms of motivations for viewing. So last time when I was here, you guys were very, very kind to me, and you didn't, I was saying to you, tenderness. At the time I was saying when you're feeling tender, it makes you want to, you'll view sad media, and it's because we're searching for meaning, you know. But I never really measured that. I just kind of said that, and you didn't say, wait a minute, you didn't measure that. So y'all are very, very kind, and I appreciate that. But I really, it was a problem that I kind of was just assuming that something was going on. I felt like I needed to expand this motivation. Is there a motivation that we have for viewing entertainment that is akin to searching for meaningfulness? Okay, just as a little background, I differentiate between, if you look at research in well-being, happiness research, a lot of people they'll talk about distinctions between hedonism and well-being in hedonic terms, and that's happiness is pleasure and happiness is, you know, subjective well-being, versus what we'll call, and I do now call too, eudaimonia. And I mentioned this word last time I was here, but I hadn't tried to operationalize it. But eudaimonia is a different sort of happiness in terms, it's not so much in terms of pleasure, but it's happiness in terms of the good life, virtue and justice and insight. And this is a Aristotelian term, you know, and this is presumably the higher happiness, is eudaimonia. And so people who are studying well-being are making these distinctions, and I thought that it might be a nice framework to use as a means of studying entertainment and how it is that people are using it, because, of course, hedonism has been the focus of our attention. So I set out and I thought, you know, well, let's see if we can measure both of these things. I don't want to imply, by the way, that I think that these are the only two motivations. I think there are other ones, but I just was looking at these two because I was responding to Zillman's original conceptualization. So with these in mind, it is my feeling that if you look at the literature in entertainment psychology, these conceptualizations of uses of entertainment. No, nobody's formally stated this, but I kind of think that they've been conceptualized along a continuum where hedonism is at one end, and if you're not seeking entertainment for pleasure, then it's assumed that you're got some counter hedonic motivations. I mean, if you look at what Zillman will say when he'll say, in considering why somebody would want to watch something sad, he would say, they're acting in ways that are so counter to hedonic concerns. So, in other words, the idea is either you're hedonist or you're not. And I want to say, you know what, if we were to set this out, and if I were going to try to measure this, like a Likert type scale or something like that, it would imply, to me, the following model. Here's eudaimonia. Imagine that I measured I used 6 different questions in a questionnaire. Some of them were about searching for meaning, eudaimonia, and some of them were about searching for pleasure. Well, this conceptualization here, whether they're at opposite ends, would imply that we've got entertainment motives, and hedonism, it's like reverse-coded items. You're high on hedonism, and you're low on this not hedonism thing. But I don't think it's like that, rather. I think really what I've been wondering about is that they're really just, or it's not opposite ends of the continuum, it's that we have hedonic, or hedonism as a motivation, and we have this other motivation that we haven't really been tapping into yet. And it's not the opposite of hedonism. It's something different than hedonism, and it's eudaimonia, and it means searching, using meaning to seek greater insight into human life, human poignancy. And that kind of conceptualization implies more of a model where you've got two different measures. You've got different measures, and actually, so I'm headed there. They're not. It's not. These aren't necessarily negatively correlated. In fact, most of the research that we're finding is that it's kind of they're weakly correlated. These two things. So we set out, and I say we, mainly it's been work with Art Rainey, where we set out to try to come up with measures that would work, that would reflect eudaimonic motivations. I like movies that challenge my way of seeing the world, make me reflective, focus on human conditions and so forth, versus hedonic motivations, like I just want to see enjoyable movies as long as they're fun, they're happy, they're positive, and so forth. So we set out to try to measure those, and the first thing that I looked at was, are these opposite ends of a continuum? In other words, if you're high on one, does it mean you're low on the other? And we put it into this common conceptualization, and the model, for those of you who are into that kind of thing, the model doesn't fit. In other words, this common conceptualization is not really a very good way to talk about these two different motives, but rather the conceptualization that these are two different sort of motives, and in fact they're weakly correlated, was finding a pretty good fit here. So we've got eudaimonic and hedonic motivations there. And when we were looking to see what kinds of entertainment, this is just back to the scale here, what kinds of entertainment these measures were predicting, what kind of, if you're high on eudaimonia, what kinds of genres do you like? Well, we were finding predictable things. If you're high on eudaimonia, you're more liking documentaries, historical films, dramas, science fiction. If you're high on hedonism, comedy, action, to a lesser extent romance, those are your things. So we kept thinking about this particular model, and we needed to see if the scales were stable over different samples. And so in the second study, what we did, we ran it again, and it came up suggesting that these measures were in fact pretty stable.
Meredith?
Yeah.
So you're considering this a trait, not a state, because you're looking at it with different samples, but not the same people over different times. Because maybe one day I'm eudonic, I'm on the left side.
Yeah.
And on another day I'm hedonic. You don't reckon?
Yeah. Right now, I'm going to get to yes. Right now, we initially, when we started thinking about it, we were conceptualizing it as a trait, but I think it's both too. All right. So I think it's both, and here's how I do think it's both. Like, okay, so my husband, I would say, is very high in eudaimonic motivations.
Eudaimonic.
Yeah, eudaimon. Onic. Yet, and I'm probably the hedonist in the family. I don't, actually, you know what was really surprising? Sorry to men in the room, because I'm really going to stereotype men on this. Yeah. I thought that, you know what, my stereotype was going to be that women were going to be much more eudaimonic than men. No, women were the hedonists. I was like, what? Okay, my data keep telling it to me, so I have to believe it.
Even if you take
Even if it hurts.
romantic comedies, take those out of the equation, is it balance
Well,
take action films out too.
Yeah.
Take romantic comedies out, you don't have a sample.
But, okay, so he would be eudaimonic, but yet at the same time, there's variation. So overall, that's the more stable preference, but, he might want to watch dot, maybe control for it, but also use it also as a means of validation, because it sounds like what you're saying is that it would be really useful. So that's my homework from you. So thank you. So anyway, fun seeking was the closest that I got from, it's just part of the BAS, part of the BIS BAS kind of thing. Fun seeking was just, a little. And so, here we found, these are just partial correlations, by the way. It's not a full-fledged regression because there'd be way too much multicollinearity that's happening there. So these are just partial correlation controlling for gender. And this is, by the way, a college student sample. And eudaimonia, that trait is greater reflective need for cognition. I mean, these are pretty substantially, at least with my data. Your data may behave much better than for me. This is a pretty big correlation between need for cognition and things like that, reflectiveness, searching for meaning. I thought that this was very interesting. Searching for meaning, yes. Having found it, not so much. So that was good for us. And then hedonism, it's not that hedonism as a trait is like, these people who are just idiots. I mean, it's not really, it's just fun. In a lot of ways, it's very nice. I mean, it's optimistic, humor, spontaneity, and so forth. So those were what was predicting that. And then,
Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Going back, pessimism
yeah.
also comes out high there on the hedonism side. All by itself.
It's a negative, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's a negative.
Yeah, that's that little negative sign.
So this has been, our attempt right now, and this is with Art Rainey. Oh, and I will tell you, this other, just as an aside, because I was collecting data with Art Rainey, it was possible we would collect it at both of our universities, and so then we could compare what kinds of, highbrow, lowbrow, Penn State versus Florida State. I don't want to talk about that.
It didn't come out like
No.
that.
Real data. There are Tallahassee people who are.
Anyway.
It's not about intelligence.
So what the first thing that we wanted to say is that maybe the motivation, a motivation, isn't sad media necessarily, but it might be meaningful. I mean, we seek meaningfulness. too. And that's what we were initially starting to do, is try to figure out how to measure that and validate that scale. So the second thing, though, that we wanted to do is expand. You'll notice in this paradox we've got sad responses, sadness. You know, why do we like media that elicits sadness? And so the other thing that I hope to do is to expand the notion of what we mean by sad affective responses, and instead saying it's meaningful affective responses. And so let me try to elaborate on what I mean here, and do stop me if I'm not making sense. Does eudaimonia, as search, if eudaimonia is really measuring searching for meaning, does it predict liking films that are sad? Because that's what we focused on so much in the research in entertainment. Or is it something else? Okay. So in this study, we had a nice big sample, and the reason why we did was I was working with Louise Maras, and some of you may be familiar with some of her work. She's at Wisconsin, and we were grad school buddies together, actually, when we were there, and it's just awesome to get back together and work on something again. And she's interested in development, age, and changes over time, and she's been very interested not only in children, but elderly viewers as well. And so we needed a big sample with the diversity of age ranges. And so what we did was sent home, I teach a very intimate class of 300. We're like that. And I think she does too. I think she teaches a pretty big. And so we enlisted the assistance of our students in the class, and we sent home with them questionnaires that over Thanksgiving break, because many of them were going home, and they would get the family members to fill them out. So we got a nice big age range. And actually at this point in the future, if I do this again, if we do this again, it's almost at a point where I think it would be okay to be collecting these data online too, so it's not quite such a pain. But we measured here with this sample, both we tried to get more validation for our measures, but then we also asked them at one point to think of their favorite film. Just name your favorite film. Think about what your favorite film was. And then we had a list of different, and then think back to the first time you saw it. How did you feel? And we gave them a lot of adjectives, different affect. So here just, this was our scales, and we were happy that it looked pretty good for this new sample. And the responses to their favorite film. Well, this is just an exploratory factor analysis of some of the items. But when we did it, we have two factors here. One we called meaningful affect, okay, which would include feeling introspective, inspired, contemplative, compassionate. Whereas entertained affect, the ones there were feeling amused, humored, entertained, excited, okay? So we have these two affective reactions to their favorite film. And then, because a question is, does searching for meaning mean you like sad stuff? We also had this other scale, which was, I'm calling it negative affect here. When I watched this film, it made me feel sad. These are reverse coded, upbeat, and happy and emotional. Made me feel sad, emotional, upbeat, reverse coded, okay? Happy, reverse coded. So this was negative affect. I'm going to come back to this in a second. So now, question number one for us is eudaimonia associated with liking films that elicit negative affect, sadness, for example, per se? And so this is just a little quickie regression. And when we did that, it's not so much negative affect that's if I'm high on eudaimonia, I'm not saying, hey, I really want to watch films that make me feel negative. And rather, I'm choosing films that make me feel introspective, inspired, contemplative, and so So far, so good? Okay. So, and then the question is what's up with meaningful affect? I mean, like, what's that about, you know? How does that feel? So what is the nature of meaningful affect is the next question. What is that? And I'm like shocked. I do get yanked, you know, I'm sure we've all had students and they'll come and they'll say, I'm working on a paper on, you know, children and advertising, and there's been nothing written on children and advertising, and you're like, ah, you know. So at the risk of sounding like that, okay, this whole notion of this particular affective reaction, meaningfulness, I've called it tenderness. I really have found very limited amount of attention. Empathy is, you know, I think empathy is really, really close. Compassion might be it too, you know. But as far as labeling it as an affect identifiable, you know.
A larger term.
Yeah, just, so that's, okay, so what is the nature of meaningful affect? Well, at this point, what I'm thinking that it might be is mixed affect, and there's a reason for that. I'll just give you some quotes. Konstantin Sedekaides, he's been working a lot, he's a psychologist, and actually he was here for a while. And he was actually also, I took a class with him at Wisconsin when I was at grad school. But his work right now has been on, lately, a lot of his work has been in nostalgia. And when I'm inspired by that work because he talks about it as, you know, first of all, it's a search for meaning, you know, and that's good. And it helps us kind of make sense, grapple with our existential dilemmas, which I think is good, and that it's bittersweet too. Ultimately, he thinks it's more sweet than bitter, but he will say it's bittersweet, so it's mixed. So that's interesting to me, you know. And I think we can. So I'll move on. Recently, John Haidt is a guy who is at UVA, and he kind of works out of a positive psychology tradition, and he has been doing some work on positive emotion, he calls it other praising emotion, and where he wants to say that when we see somebody do something so inspiring, so good for humanity, so just bigger than life, that we have this feeling that he calls elevation, you know. It's being verklempt, you know. And we're not supposed to, you know, really talk about our own political proclivities at Penn State, but I'm not at Penn State, am I? So away I go. I'll just say, I was an Obama supporter, and when I watch on election night, I mean, even just standing up here talking about election night, I want to just start to weep, you know, and just seeing that, and I could see people in the crowd who were feeling the same way. That, I believe, was elevation. Why did I feel happy, and why did I want to cry at the same time? Well, that's your homework. No, I mean, but it's this mixed affect that I think is happening, and then most recently, some work, research. I identified poignancy specifically, and I use that word, and they say it's mixed. It is mixed affect that occurs at meaningful. It occurs at the point of meaningful endings. This article, like the third or fourth author on this article, is a woman named Carstensen, who is interested in. Well, she's interested in, I'm looking at Melanie, because you've undoubtedly,
She's
Jabbar Training advisor, so there's a
Yeah.
positive psychology.
Yeah. So it's noting that, you know, when we start realizing that our time is limited, that we start to place this value on what is good and true and, you know, meaningful in life. We kind of shed our lives of pointless, irritating relationships with people we don't want to be with.
They call it the no asshole rule.
So, you know, but that's, I mean, it's easy, most evident, it's probably most evident when we think about, you know, growing old and dying, or mortality, but it's also evident among young people who might have, you know, or it might be evident every year at Penn State, all of the students who work for the school newspapers will write their last column. And it's in that column they get all poignant, you know, because they're realizing that this is their last college days, you know what I'm saying? And so,
Well, earlier you showed there was a statistic, there was a significant effect for age in your big sample there. I was wondering that earlier, that the older people were more toward that meaningful side of that word I still can't say.
yeah.
Eudaimonic.
Eudaimonic.
Yeah.
Oh, eudaimonic, right. I'm not demonic at all.
I was really hoping they would be, but it was not as strong as I had hoped. So I've got to figure out why that's happening. I really was hoping it would be, Jane.
Yeah.
You know, I thought it would.
It's in the right direction, but it's not as strong as the others. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. So I'm not sure what's going on there.
What was your top age?
80 something.
Yeah.
And was that in the regression as like maximum to minimum, or is that's per year? That's not per year. Okay. That's the 0.08 correlation.
It was I just entered age as a continuous, as a variable. So it wasn't perfectly normally distributed either. So you know. But yeah, I gotta figure that one. I gotta figure that out. So, but in this particular article, and first of all, one of the reasons why it caught my attention and I was so very pleased by it was that finally somebody's really trying to not only conceptualize but operationalize something that I thought was about as close to being what I wanted to get to. And they say that it's positive and negative affect simultaneously. And this is very interesting to me because, okay, here's how they operationalized it, and this is what we did too. Mixed affect. So if you're a SPSS user, let's say, and you go and you're going to run some syntax, you would say you would have two measures, one that measures positive affect and one that measures negative affect, or one that measures happy and one that measures sad. Each person has two scales, okay? And you would say mixed affect, give me the minimum of these two. This is how they operationalized it. So imagine that I got a 7-point scale for happy and I got a 7-point scale for sad. Okay. And all right, here this person had low on both. Their mixed affect score is pretty low. They're not experiencing much mixed affect. Next person, they're not very happy. They're very sad though. Well, if you're very sad but not happy, you're not experiencing mixed affect. So they also would have a low score on mixed affect. Are you okay with that? Where the opposite true. I'm really happy, not sad at all. I'm not mixed. The only time I'm mixed is when I'm both. And so that's how they operationalized it. So we went back to this scale here and we broke it up so we could. Yeah, this is Posthoc, I'm going to tell you, because we collected the data and then we saw the article and we were like, cool, we can try it, and see. So we divided it up into sad only and happy only so that we could do this little trick here and come up with a measure of mixed affect. So the question was, what causes, minimum. Mixed affect is the minimum of these two scales. So the question is, what is the nature of meaningful affect? And So what we did was just try to predict, and again, remember, here's the question of, well, like we've traveled all the way, you know, all the way back to Pennsylvania, and let me remind you why the question was, think of your favorite film. How did you feel the first time you viewed it? If you told me you felt meaningful, then I want to say, ooh, was that happy or sad, or was it both? Okay? And so there's two ways to look at it. One is looking at it via an interaction, and this happened to work, but I'm going to kind of, in the interest of time, the real, I'm skipping, we can go back to it if you want, but the real thing that I was interested in was, does mixed affect predict it? Is it happy, sad, simultaneously? And it was, which was good. Now, it's more sad than happy, but it's still mixed. Okay? So, now, it's a lot of clicking for just that. Okay. Okay, so one last part. So far, I've been treating all of this as though it's a trait. And one of the big motivations was, how does it help resolve the question, why do sad people like sad media? And all I've said so far here is that sometimes when we want to view sad things, maybe what we really want to do is view meaningful things. And so far, all I've said here is that when we like meaningful things, it might be happy and sad at the same time. That's all I've said so far. But it hasn't really gotten at that question, why do sad people in sad moods like sad media? And by the way, I think a lot of this too is a methodological artifact, because we continually, and I do this, and I've certainly done this, is that when I measure affect, happy, sad, load at opposite ends of a continuum, this means that I can't test this question. And this is just kind of a, anyway. Okay, so now, given that if I want to get to this last question, why do sad people like sad media, I need to start treating it like a state rather than a trait. And so, why does sadness predict enjoyment selection of sad media? And I want to say, let's rephrase that, and we're going to, instead of asking that question, the question is, meaningful affect is a predictor. So, of interest in meaningful media. So, here we needed to switch gears and try to see if our measure of eudaimonia and hedonism could be translated to be state-like measures rather than trait measures. And then the second question was, if I'm in a meaningful affective state, if I'm feeling particularly wistful, poignant, nostalgic, etc., do I have this preference more? Okay. So in this research, this is preliminary. We've got a couple rounds of data, and I'll tell you my failing here at the end, and maybe you can help me get out of this quandary. But this, at least initially, we had this online questionnaire where we just simply measured current mood. You know, we just measured it, took it like it was. How are you feeling right now? And then we gave them eudaimonia and hedonism state measures. So I'll get to that in a second. Current mood, meaningful affect, our measure included tender, sentimental, pensive. That's our measure of their current mood. We also had negative affect. These were reverse coded. And we, just like we did in the last study, we broke that into sad only and happy only so we could look at mixed affect. So far, so good. How are you feeling? You're feeling? You're feeling meaningful. I'm going to measure that. I'm going to measure how negative you feel. And I'm going to break that down. And then I'm going to say, okay, if you could watch a movie right now, what do you want to watch? Well, before, when we measured eudaimonia as a trait, we would measure it like, I like to see movies that challenge my way of seeing the world. When we measured it as a state, we had to say, what do you want to watch right now? Like right now, I want to watch a movie that would challenge my way of seeing the world. If I went home right now, this is what I would want to watch. So as a state. Does that get it?
And your choices for movies are not mixed at all. You can't have both, like something that blows up a lot of stuff and the good guys save other good guys and.
Terminator 2, when he went down.
You watched
that? That's my job.
Oh. So you could only be eudaimonia or.
No, you could be both.
No, I mean the movie.
Oh,
You
no.
could choose a movie that was, you couldn't say, I want a movie that's both.
No, because we also, I don't know that I have it on here. I don't have it on here. We also had hedonic state measures. So it would just be like, right now, if I could watch a movie, I would want to focus on meaningful conditions if I said yes. But I could also later say yes
To blow up stuff.
Yeah. So we'll analyze them. So, yeah, we won't treat them as opposite ends of a continuum. So the question is, what affect, what mood predicts these states? And what we found is that, again, meaningful affect. I'm not even analyzing hedonism here, although, you know, of course we have that data, but the focus is on eudaimonia. But meaningful affect was predicting being in the mood for a movie that was meaningful, okay? That would elicit meaningful affect, okay? That would, being in a meaningful mood was predictive of wanting to view films that reflected eudaimonic states. The question then is, here, again, what's the nature of meaningful affect? When we're in that state, when we're feeling that way, what does that feel like? And what it feels like, this, by the way, this, by the way, I thought it was going to be a pointer. This interaction wasn't significant, but when I used the mixed affect measure, what is the minimum of happy and sad, then it was happy. I need to put all this into a sort of model. And I'm going to throw the model out at you and then I'll stop. This is the model that's emerging right now. Here's been the problem. Sad people, they like sad films. And when I look at this, and these are data that we collected this fall, when I look at that and I measure it like that, it looks kind of like that's happening. Okay? And that's caused a lot of us to go, what is wrong with us? Why do sad people like sad films? But I think that the better thing is, it's meaningful affect. Feeling I need to think about what is human poignancy. And that causes me to view films that serve those ends. And it just so happens that this is associated with mixed affect, and films that elicit meaningful affect is associated with mixed affective responses. And what has happened to us is that we have measured both of these things as dichotomies. And when we do that, we come up with that correlation, but we're missing the picture. And that this relationship is driven by a seeking, a need, to think about, the purpose of our lives. And that might sometimes be very, very, very sad, Hotel Rwanda or Schindler's List or Sophie's Choice or Once Over the Cuckoo's Nest. But that doesn't mean that we don't gain from that.
In addition to the desire to view films with meaningful affect, does this also cause you that, regardless of what the film is, to interpret it with meaningful affect? So even if it might not necessarily be something like Schindler's List, would it be interpreted as more meaningful anyway?
That's a good question.
So maybe her T2, that if she's looking for it,
yeah.
Absolutely. I laughed and cried and she was feeling.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a really good question. Here's been one thing that we're going to do this spring. first of all, I'm kind of jumping the gun here, but I'll just tell you, I need to manipulate mixed affect. I mean, I just need to do that, and I know that. But I haven't been able to successfully do it yet. And I think it's a really tough one to manipulate, but I have to do, I have to do that. And assuming that we can do that, then one thing that we're going to do is look to see people's interpretation and people's responses, you know. Not just what they want to view or what they would select to view, but what happens, if they're in that state, what happens when they view. So, yeah. I guess what I'm saying here is that, yeah, this correlation exists, but it's just, this is where I think the action is. It's seeking meaningfulness, and affect's just along for the ride, you know. And so, in that sense, I'm not entirely, I don't think that these are necessarily a puzzle. Maybe we were calling it a puzzle, but we just weren't measuring it specifically. So, some related questions, I think, are what is it, the nature of enjoyment? You know, because it is kind of weird. I don't think we would call that enjoyment necessarily, to say, I really enjoyed that. So I've been working with Ann Barsh, this woman, on trying to get at that issue. And Zillman has noted this, I think, in the most beautiful quote, where he says maybe it's ill-advised to even focus on enjoyment as a way of thinking about it. We should return to Aristotle. Aristotle really comes out to be the hero in a lot of this stuff, I think, and say that really the redeeming value is making us cognizant of our vulnerabilities, compassions, and a need for emotional wellness. And I just think that's just such a beautiful quote. So that's one question, what's enjoyment? Another is what gives rise to meaningful affective states? You know, what is it that's doing that? Is it that we're aging, or is it that what is it that causes us to be in this state? Do our preferences change across the lifespan? What are the outcomes here of consuming media? Does it lead to greater feelings of well-being, ultimately, or not? Just to conclude, here's Wedding Crashers for you. By talking about this, I absolutely don't think that entertainment, I would say, my guess, and I think Zillman would agree, you can tell me about if he would or not, but I think he would argue that by far the majority of entertainment experience is about pleasure. I mean, it is. And so I don't want to suggest otherwise necessarily. All I'm suggesting is that it's not paradoxical sometimes for us to also use it to contemplate meaningfulness. So that's where I'm working. That's where my head is at these days. So I would love to entertain, no pun intended, any questions that you have. Great.
Excuse me, Craig, just one minute. Just want to make one announcement. I'm sorry. We've had some emails from the administration saying that many chairs are missing from different rooms. So I know that there are a lot of chairs that we got from another room. So I just want to make a request: if you're brought from a room, a chair from another room, please don't forget to put it back. Apologize, but great.
Did you say that you did not find a relationship between meaningful affective state and age? Is that?
It was not what I was thinking. And I need to go back and look at the specific one for that, but I was thinking more about age and eudaimonia.
Okay.
But even that, though, I have to admit being woefully disappointed that it wasn't there. I was so sure it was going to be there.
There's some sociology literature that shows that instead of looking at age, if you're going to look at generation, that they found differences between older generations before the internet and before having access to other forms of media, that there would be that form of relationship. But for younger generations who, through the internet, having exposure to a variety of forms of media, that they experience those tendencies to reflect more
Okay.
based on more experiences that they have through media.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. So maybe we need to rethink what we mean by developmental or changes. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Do you at all distinguish between sad as sad but maybe elevating and sad as in depressing? Because when just looking at the examples of sad movies that you put up there, I saw Living Las Vegas once. I will not see it again because I find it sad as in depressing. It's a good film, but once was enough. Casablanca, on the other hand, is not depressing at all. It's sad but sweet. I like the music. I watched it how many times, and I'll watch it again probably. So there is sad and sad. There are different kinds of sad, and maybe one is more suitable for the purposes of this discussion than the other.
That's a great point, because the grad students I'm working with, okay, they're troopers. And I'm saying that because as we speak, they're in my office editing video, and they're looking at video and they're editing scenes. They get to edit Wedding Crashers too, though.
But still, I mean, that's got grad school's sad and all.
Well,
that's almost a little dangerous to put them through too much of that.
well, we were talking.
Except when you can be part of the stimulus, right, like in Indiana?
Yeah. Don't talk about what they did in Indiana.
No, yeah, but because we were talking about, well, first of all, we wanted flat out, in the experiment we do want to run, they'll be flat out sad. And I think that Leaving Las Vegas might be there. I think about, I don't know if any of you've seen any Von Trier, Dancer in the Dark. I mean, you see that with the Bjork. Oh, it's sad. Lars Van Trier, oh my God. I mean, it's just unrelentingly sad. And so that's an experimental condition. Another condition will be like elevation, which will have sad, but it'll also have, we hope, inspiration, poignancy too. And then we'll have, and then when we started talking about that, we were going to break that out into the poignant condition that had almost no sadness, and then was really pretty sad. So, but then we're starting to split hairs. So now we just need to trust our pretest ultimately. But because like for me, I asked my class the other day. I haven't seen this movie. This is my intimate class. You'll see we do get intimate. I go, I haven't seen this movie. Tell me about the movie called The Notebook. And I thought all the women in the class were going to just melt and fall apart and just start crying, and they're like, oh no, I haven't seen it. Is that a?
It's really romantic, yeah, and sweet and bitter and sweet, yeah.
Bittersweet, yeah.
Yes, for young lovers, yeah, they made lots of in young age,
yeah,
but they get together, yeah, after overcome many difficulties, yeah. So.
Well, so that's the
flicker,
yeah. Yeah, and the women were like this, and here's the men's expression. And so then I said, well, remember that scene from Field of Dreams? Dad, you want to play catch? And the guys were like, oh God, I can't. So
yeah.
What's sad was as long as it's not unrelentingly sad. Here's the other thing too. I'll just throw out. I'm not sure about this. I'm picturing the future reviewer looking at this, and if I were a future reviewer, I would say, hey, you know what you're manipulating? Mortality salience.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
I don't know what to do.
What about with animals? What about old yellers? Little David, but it's very sad the dog dies.
Just going to mention.
And so that's not you. You can't be putting yourself in the spot. It's much worse than if you got it.
It's worse.
Oh.
That actually gets to a larger question, and that's the specific content. Because we're talking about sad as though it's sort of one kind of sad.
Mm-hmm.
Your dog dies. You might be able to go to a sad movie about romance and loss and everything.
And you can't
But
go
so
watch-
help me, if a dog dies in that movie, you'll walk out, you'll go nuts. And there's a huge difference between the sadness that is associated with why you're sad, particularly if it's a dog, and sadness. I mean, if I honestly think that if I had been a Holocaust survivor, I couldn't have gone to Schindler's List. I can barely go to the Holocaust Museum.
Right. No, I agree, yes. And so the specific, but you know what, I think that's such a good question. And, you know, early on when we were first measuring this and we were using correlational measures, that's dangerous because it's noisy, you know, and it's messy because of that. And it was particularly messy because we would go, what's your favorite movie? And they could name anything, and then we'd say, how did it make you feel? But that's, the noise was the problem, but that was also the beauty too, because even though they were naming whatever they wanted to name, the affect associated with what they named was consistent with what we were hoping, you know, that they would find. And then when we get into this thing where we got to manipulate it and show them a specific thing, you know, then now I'm biting my fingernails for the very reason that you're saying. And so what we're trying to do.
Well, there's a lot of individual difference about what's going to be said and what's not.
That's right. I agree, you know. And plus we can't possibly get people in there and have them watch full-length films. I mean, it just becomes practically impossible. So we thought, we just use scenes, but then is that context enough? Yeah. And so then we're going to try to use, you know, so for what about prior viewing? What if they've seen that? And then what if, so we're trying to use multiple instantiations of, so within the poignant condition, we'll use, you know, whatever it turns out in our pretest, but imagine like Prince of Tides, you know, these, one of 3 or 4 different films in hopes that we can get around this very serious issue. Bring up, it's scaring me.
How are you using foreign film?
Yeah, see,
Where people are less likely to have seen them.
Yeah, and stuff too, like or older films. You know, nobody hardly. I can't believe it. My students haven't seen Harold and Maude. Y'all probably haven't seen. Y'all are young. If you haven't seen Harold and Maude, see Harold and Maude.
Is it sad?
It's uplifting.
Any dogs?
No dogs.
No dogs.
I can't go see them. So there's going to be some specific things. And
Yeah.
talk about that for. Well, when Dr. Zillman first started talking about this, I haven't spoken to him about this topic in years, but he assumed, because I had been dumped, and Jenny Ordman, a fellow grad student, had just come to graduate school and left her husband and 2 young kids for a short period of time. She was very sad. I was very sad. So he wanted to expose us to similar material, you know, be about music where movies or music for her where a mother had to leave children, and thought that the empathy that those provided would make us feel not alone. And that's why we enjoyed it. And that both it tore us up where Bernard, right?
Still.
And where if we saw other sad stuff, we enjoyed that more.
Sure.
Because it didn't remind me specifically that you had another guy.
Oh, yeah.
And it didn't remind her that her kids were not going to see her.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was, but he saw it as mood. He always talked about this in relation to mood, not state or trait. Well, I guess mood is sort of
state.
Yeah, but not trait. So
yeah.
Talk about it as transient mood, and it was a mood management technique. And so you're getting way away from it. That's interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, ultimately it was the mood that was of interest to me, but I thought initially that it would be easier to validate it as a trait, because and then you can use all sorts of individual differences and stuff like that, you know. But it does come.
And even with women subjects, he always wanted to know where you were in the menstrual cycle, which is hard to get through IRB now. We didn't do IRB then. But he thought, yeah, right. If he signed it, it was approved. And so he really thought it was.
Those are the days, you know, like, that would be great.
Yeah, and this is Alabama, which is why there is so much IRB now. adopt your zone. This is asking an interesting, well, a larger question is, what are you going to watch to get out of your set?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just hoping that it doesn't. It's not going to resolve. That it at least puts on the table a new way of discussing, what might be happening, and your research with the kids, and when they're sad. I mean, that kind of thing. I just think that was so valuable because adolescents. I mean, when I listen to music that a lot of adolescents find very incredible, it is so sad. I mean, a lot of it is so sad. I think.
Maybe you could do music instead of movies. Music.
I'm sorry, but now that Facebook will show what you're listening to and what you have to say, you can actually do. Is anybody doing this right now?
Not that I know.
You're not, right?
No.
Correlating the semantic content of the text that the person is putting on their site with what they say they're listening to. I mean, that gives you some pretty nice stuff to correlate. And big numbers. It's what?
To get a hold of that information, right?
They put it out there.
But don't you have to be a friend?
Well, on Facebook you do, but not MySpace.
Oh.
It depends on the setting.
The other question I had was whether you think there would be any cultural differences, because I was thinking that you're still a word I cannot pronounce. Eudaimonic.
Eudaimonia.
And I've been studying. Yeah.
That's Greek. Eudaimonia. That's how it's pronounced. Eudaimonia.
Yeah, you made it even harder.
This is how it was meant to be pronounced. This is how the Greeks pronounce it.
But I've been looking at Chinese media, and where, at least in the past 30 years or so, it's much of that media has been designed to be meaningful. That much of it is government produced and is very message oriented. Would you agree?
Yes.
Yeah. And whether then in that culture they've almost been trained to be looking for meaning in their media, rather than. Although when we were talking earlier about this earlier movie, clearly you find a lot of pleasure in your media as well. Yeah. And there is, and increasingly it looks like there are dramas.
I mean, I have some great. It's a very good question. The only other cross-culturally so far, the only other country I've collected data on here is Germany, and that's so Western. It's so Western, So I don't.
And there they've been trained to seek grimness or something. Order.
Yeah. I mean, it was actually.
Well, we're throwing stereotypes around.
It did become an issue for us in the sense that a lot of the films that and this is with Ann Barsh, this colleague I was mentioning, a lot of the films that we were considering using as part of the questionnaire were Holocaust films, and so how do you deal with that? It's kind of guilt and, so forth. So, I mean, I think cultural issues are very important ones. And at this point, I find at least that many of the collaborators that I have are in Europe and not in Asia so much. That's just I haven't met ones who might want to collaborate yet.
Oh, we've got some.
But if that's the case, I'd like to know. I thought I saw.
I had a question. As far as DVs, do these things trend similarly whether you're looking at selection or enjoyment?
Are you saying dependent variables?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, do both state and trait preferences do they affect whether people choose to go into a movie the same way that they expect whether people enjoy?
That's real hard.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I hope that it'll predict both. But I don't know that. You know, because we've asked people mainly what do they think they would enjoy. You know, but did you enjoy this, or did you appreciate this? Is a different question. So and a lot of this is hypothetical. I mean, do you think you would enjoy it, or would you select it?
Well, it also seems like the state, yes, the state variable is likely to fluctuate. I mean, if you're watching a 2-hour movie, and you're seeking this out for a particular reason because of your state variable, that state variable is likely to perhaps change in the course of the movie. That's probably, you know, somebody would say that's probably why you chose to watch the movie in the first place.
Yeah.
So by the end, if you're evaluating your enjoyment at the end of it, I wonder if that's going to be the same as the selection.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know yet.
In terms of selection patterns, could you do something along the lines of hooking people, like if you have people at a computer already, in particular, hooking them up in front of a Netflix account and asking them to set up selections?
You know,
what they watch for the next period of time.
Well, in fact, we were just talking about this just earlier today. What I'm going to do, and you guys have access to Media Lab software, and one thing, it's a really cool little thing that it's called Web Tracker, and basically what it will do is, and I called it MBO Flicks, you know, just as a placeholder, just to, you know, and so have a little, and I divided it into genres, and I just called it, you know, tearjerkers, comedy, whatever. And they're going to have, I think we're going to give them, you know, so many minutes to surf. But what it'll do is it'll count how many seconds they were at each place too, not just where they went. So we'll try. Hopefully it'll turn out, but I think that's really important to get a behavioral measure for sure.
You used the favorite film for your questionnaire, but I was wondering if it wouldn't be better to ask people to say what was the last film you saw that you really liked, whether it was, you know, more hedonic movie or more eudaimonic movie. It doesn't matter because but it would be sort of more fresh because I think favorite, well, I don't know what's my favorite film out of what category. I can't say I have one favorite film, but I can definitely say what was the last movie I saw that I thought was a good movie. And then maybe that just cleaner.
It might be cleaner. It might give me better predictor too. It might be a stronger predictor just because it's fresh. And I agree. Somebody asked me, we would try to ease people with the favorite and say, of all the movies, like pick one that's one of your favorites, and then people felt a little less pressure because there's so much weight on them.
Depending on the mood, I may be thinking more along, you know, dramatic films or more along sort of the fun films. Depending on the moment you ask me, but what was the last good one I saw would be stable.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good point. Might be, you know what? It might be worth asking it both ways in a questionnaire just to see what differences it makes. You know.
Also, the favorite movie issue can be tied with social identity. It doesn't have to be with psychological mood. Someone can choose and say this is my favorite movie because in some aspect they feel connected that this is something they should consume, considering they belong in certain groups.
Definitely.
Culture.
I agree. I mean, and so I'm not explaining. I mean, there's so much variance on explaining, you know. Yeah.
Maybe to be better, the movie along this line that was maybe most frequently seen, that they enjoy, how to say it, it's a guilty pleasure, something they see more often than something they would say that goes along with something they should have been watching.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I like Casablanca because it's a great movie, but instead they perhaps enjoy T2 or something else.
Oh, that was her.
I like T2.
I like what happens in
I
Vegas.
find it meaningful and so this is something that has to be taken into consideration. I think you have some really nice books done on the issues of social distinction from French authors like Pierre Bourdieu and others who really deals with these issues that the movies you choose, the music you choose, even the food you choose are highly and tightly connected with the social and cultural sociologists have been doing this with issues of lifestyles and how certain lifestyles and cultural consumptions are connected and associated with this. It might be really social. I find this, when you talk about this, I think it can be quite helpful for sociologists to prove those things.
I would I mean, if I've got a really easy email,
Yeah, I don't know.
MBO at PSU, edu. I would love to see, you know, ways of going about measuring that. I mean, I'd be honest with you. Sometimes I pick and choose too, just because these poor undergraduate participants, you know, I like get them, and then I'm just asking them everything under the sun. But it's important in scale development, clearly, to try to validate that and get many samples. So this is a really useful thing.
You've mentioned Aristotle multiple times. You have not used the word catharsis. And yet, it seems to me that at least one use of sadness is that maybe you have to be male for this. I don't know that part. I've only been one brain. But it's one way to get your tear ducts working. And you go to a sad movie because you're sad, but then you feel better afterwards because it helped you cry. Now, that sounds awfully simplistic, I mean, but it's also part of the whole Aristotelian structure. Is it possible? That's just what's happening.
You know, I definitely appreciate what you're saying. I'm going to say this. I do appreciate what you're saying. Zillman does not appreciate what you're
Zillman
saying.
did not let us use the C word. He says it
Yeah.
doesn't happen, it's research discounts.
Yeah, and he's written about that. But and social scientists will often just say catharsis, but I really think that in media effects anyway, you know, people go catharsis, but because mainly they're thinking about media violence as the thing,
Get it out of your
and
system.
not about and you know it's like, you know, people haven't really been necessarily studying it so much with these kind of media. Very few have studied the notion of catharsis, but I'll tell you, it has huge popular resonance. And so, like, maybe you've heard of these things called cinema therapy, you know, the girl's guide to movies. It's like your boyfriend broke up with you, here's what you're gonna watch, and boy, you're gonna feel good after you watch this movie, you know. And so I would say catharsis is a very big kind of framework there in that. And then there was a content analysis that was done where it was looking at advice columns on what to watch when you're sad, and it was almost always predicting to watch this. So the question would be, if catharsis doesn't work, why do we continue to believe that it works? And so...
It's empathy. I swear, I still feel like it's empathy. It's not that you get it out of your system, but you realize you're not alone, and so you feel better. But it doesn't mean you got the sadness out. You just have contextualized it.
I have a way of coping.
And then, and cope, that's it. She's much better. That you can cope with it. It's a coping mechanism, but it's not an erasure mechanism.
Well, whatever it is, catharsis doesn't get you fully out of the system. It helps you to cope. I don't think that catharsis works in the way that you're completely
Purging?
purging, yeah.
And I don't.
You know, people who have upset stomachs stick their finger down and feel better afterwards. That doesn't mean they're no longer sick, but at least they got rid of an immediate, some source of concentrated stress. And I swear that right now I believe, maybe it's only because it's popular, but the same thing has to be able to happen.
But the physical, when you
Doesn't mean
vomit,
that-
that thing is gone. But if the guy dumped
Well,
it,
but
he's
the
still
condition,
dumped.
but the food poisoning that caused it may not be gone.
Right there.
So that, I mean, I don't want to overdraw the analogy, but
So you just sounded like grad school all over again, vomiting.
Oh, I don't keep it.
and then she leaves.
Okay, time for one last question.
Years ago, you remember the Strand had that little formula to metaphor the rewards and involvement and effort and big rewards and little effort get lots of use and so forth. If your two variables are indeed independent, it's very likely that they exist in some relationship, and the hedonism at the top and the other longer word. But there's probably some natural ratio that exists.
A natural.
Yeah. So it's sort of kind of stock relationship.
Yeah. Hopefully, it's leading us to fulfillment.
Right.
You know, our greater insight. Which I know I got